welcome to the Oscoda Township Regular Board Meeting, June 12th. We can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Ms. McGuire.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Here.
Mr. Gasky.
Here.
Mr. Cummings.
Here.
Mr. Nordine here. Mr. Byer.
Here.
Mr. Weed.
Here. Are there any agenda additions? Agenda additions? All right, hearing none. All in favor of approving the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is passed. Next is public comment. There is a 4-minute time limit, and if you filled out a card up front there and provide it to the superintendent. Do you have a card?
I do. David Sherman would like to talk about the draft medical marijuana ordinance.
Thank you. If you could come up and please present your, or state your name and come to the podium, please.
Right here, sir.
David Sherman, 9610A, Missouri in Oscoda. I am opposed to having marijuana brought into Oscoda to either grow, transport, warehouse, or distribution stations. You are only encouraging bigger problems and by allowing this to happen. Don't just look at the instance of dollars. Look at the future problems that could arise. I am against this.
Thank you. Do you have any other cards?
I do. Paul Rakowski has 4 separate subjects here.
Look at your watches, make sure that it's the right time. I got a feeling we got a state Spartan maybe collecting the time and not always trustworthy, so.
Go ahead, start.
First want to talk about the ridiculous time minute or 4 minutes that we have. So don't interrupt me, please, because for every interruption I get, I'm gonna add a minute to my time. Want to put you on notice that from what I gathered from the meeting minutes from the 27th, that the board actually went into closed session illegally. So I just wanted the board to be on notice about that. Another topic is the environmental consultant that you hired. I understand you hired them after you evaluated exactly 0 other consultants. You only evaluated 1 consultant. And it's real curious that you handpicked 1 consultant without considering other qualifications of others. I've been told, well, under $5,000, we don't have to compete it. Well, I would, as my tax money being spent, I wanted the most qualified candidate. And you decided to go sole source and select somebody. I don't know if it was related to somebody on the board, somebody was related or not, but that could be a criteria to select somebody without anybody else being analyzed or evaluated. With regard to the Oscoda compliance officer, many people in our township are opposed to this compliance officer, and for very good reason, because it seems like the township government is using this compliance officer to go after people they don't like, or go after people that are politically opposed to them. So they're using them as an arm for that. And we, sometimes these little towns get these city slickers that come and sit on their boards, and they like to put in big city rules. And we live in this township because we don't want to have Big Brother looking over our shoulder. But I'm afraid this township has gone that way because of some people want to have Big Brother. They're used to big city rules. So you guys realize this, that I was prosecuted by this township through an alleged violation of the Oscoda Township Compliance Officer. And they spent $9,000 in legal fees to prosecute me for a $100 violation alleged against me that was eventually dismissed. So that's what our good board had them pursue me. They spent $9,000 at $170 an hour for Mr. Epper. And if you don't believe me, I have the bills that I got. I had to get a FOIA from the township. They wouldn't provide me those bills. At a recent meeting, Super Weed had brought was asked a question of whether their township is gonna put on a filtration system on their city water system. As it turned out, he said, no, we already have carbon filtration on our water system. Well, guess what? That was a lie. There is no carbon filtration on the city water system. In fact, the concentrations of PFCs in the city water is higher than the PFCs in my water that the township told me not to drink. And they paid for putting in a reverse osmosis system on my water system, and the township system has concentrations that are above that. And don't take my word for it, ask the Department of State Health. Is this a cover-up so the township can go and hook everybody up to city water? I don't know. Now we got Super Weed, who's gonna be going to a conference for a scientific conference, and he's a politician. Why do we need to pay $3,000 for our township supervisor to go to a scientific conference? That's what I'm trying to know. We hired a consultant, an environmental consultant, who's supposed to be.
Thank you very much, but your time
All
is
right,
up.
see you in a little while.
Any other comments?
Not for the first period.
All right, next is the consent agenda. Any comments regarding the meeting minutes for May 19th, May 22nd, and May 23rd? For finance payment of bills of $192,179.39. Any comments on that?
I have one comment, just for information for the board and everybody here. It has to do with an agenda item later on. I just wanted to point out, we paid a bill to Spicer Group in the amount of $1,731 as part of our contribution for a $30,000 grant, which the township received towards the bike path. And we're going to discuss that a little later on the agenda. I thought that might be pertinent to that conversation. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Just a comment to the audience that the payment of bills this time is a little higher than the average because we've had a 3-week gap since the last meeting. Usually it's every other Monday, so that's all.
All right, for the superintendent report, for the leaf vector repair update, any comments? Need a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Moved by Mr. Gajewski, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, subcommittee reports. I received a report earlier today talking about the results of the PFAS contamination levels within the school wells, and they came back below the EPA level. Do we have any updates regarding the RAB committee selection?
No, we're waiting for one possible more candidate, and then they'll be closed on the 15th.
15th is the deadline?
Yes.
Is that a candidate from the community at large or from this board?
The community at large.
All right, the health department had a community meeting here in Oscoda. It's the first of the kind they've ever had. There were several attendees from the community there, and they discussed how the health department could communicate to the community in case they're missing some information, that the health department's missing some information that they could be providing community and vice versa. So that was their first meeting, and their next meeting is the 21st of June. The other update I have is regarding the Boston trip. Last Friday, I was asked to be a speaker at that event now. They've had someone else cancel being a speaker, so I will be filling in that spot. And does anybody else have any subcommittee updates?
What topic are you going to speak on?
Just the township in general and how the community has been with this whole thing. So both township government and the local community, just informing what's going on. There'll be several other community representatives there from across the United States who'll be talking about the same thing in theirs, and
Good.
a lot of coordination happening. All right, then on to reports. First is the Exploration Trail Agreement.
Okay, attached to my report is a draft agreement which was intended to facilitate a $50,000 contribution from Oscoda Township to Oscoda County for Phase 1 of the Oscoda Exploration Trail. The agreement was developed in concept to accommodate legal issues that involve, potential legal issues that involve making contribution outside township boundaries. We had provided the agreement, or I had, to the county, and they met on June 7th and took that subject up amongst other things. After a fairly lengthy discussion, the county board opted not to approve the agreement. So that then arguably puts us in a position of reconsidering the request we had received previously for the $50,000 contribution. And I've attached that to my report. If there's a perceived need for formal action or a formal response to that request for funding, and I should note, by way of context, I think everybody's aware of that discussion relative to the $50,000 contribution took place a few years ago, I believe, when the River Road Bridge was the path into Oscoda. So the circumstance changed fundamentally. Nonetheless, we are left with the request for a contribution. Having said that, if there is perceived need to act, one approach might be endorsement of the agreement as written, and acknowledgement that it is the appropriate instrument under the circumstances to allow us to make a contribution. The agreement had not been brought before the board previously. Another approach might be to indicate a willingness to participate if legal concerns can be addressed to the satisfaction of the township, whether by agreement or other means. So basically the question is, does the board feel compelled to offer a response? And if so, which of those alternatives, if any, is deemed appropriate?
I'd like to say that it's been a rather interesting week regarding this at the county meeting. Many of the commissioners seem to be very ill-informed as to what was going on. They were given limited information from their administrator and very little information from anybody else, considering they have two county commissioners who've actually sat on during IET meetings, and one of them sits at the Iosco County Parks and Rec Board. So a couple of commissioners have already gone around saying, blaming Oscoda, saying that we are the reason why this is going to fail, even though Oscoda has more hours put into this project than any other organization or person in this. Here, Phase 1's not even going to be in our township. So we have put in a huge effort in trying to make this happen. And I find it extremely disheartening from the county to respond that way. Some comments made during that meeting seemed to be that they were pretty dysfunctional in managing the county. At one point, one of the commissioners was looking at me and talking very loud at me about the deficiencies of the County Parks and Rec Board, like I'm the fault for that, and I have no part of that organization.
Talking loudly.
Yes.
I think I know who it was.
They were saying things like, we don't want to enter into this agreement because it obligates funds for a future board. I don't understand quite how they don't understand that that's what they do for almost every decision they make.
I would go on to add that at another meeting, unrelated to the county commissioners, it was the Develop ASCO meeting that I try to attend. I was at the last one here, and Jeff Johnston, one of our representatives, was at the meeting. Meeting went very well. At the very end, there was an open mic, just kind of like what we do at the end of our meetings, and he gave an update and couched the update as I have some concerns about some negative fiscal impact. And I was kind of wondering what is he going at, and he then turned to me and said, well, you must know what I'm about to say. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure. So he goes, well, Oscoda has been is basically trying to withhold this $50,000 and possibly trying to blow up this project. And I lit into him. And I told him that is absolutely the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And this is exactly the reason why this board generally feels, I can't speak for all of us, but I think we have all acknowledged it in different ways, we feel disingenuousness from the county. And this is the reason why we had a contract for this particular agreement, for this $50,000. And I'm sorry, I really don't understand how, after the 2 meetings I had with Jeff about that, the one meeting that I know Aaron had with Jeff about it, other meetings that I've since learned have taken place with him about this, why he isn't fully on board with what this is all about. So, quite honestly, I've got to say personally, I don't trust the county, period. I don't trust the way they're behaving. I don't trust the games that they're playing. And I've communicated that as such to Jeff Johnston.
I would have to agree with that too, because after sitting in on several of their meetings, and then this last Wednesday meeting really solidified just that point there about trust. And that's why I would prefer a contract over anything, even a resolution.
The resolution point is actually a big one. That's the one that they keep harping on, that we sent a resolution and we agreed. That was the last words that Jeff was allowed to get out of his mouth before I lit into it, was that we had made a commitment. What he neglects to understand at the time was that we agreed under certain terms. Those terms, because they were not part of a resolution, they're not part of a legal document, they're part of a discussion, there's nothing that we can actually fall back on. That's why I believe that going and working with the county with a contract from now on in every one of our dealings makes a whole lot more sense. Because then and only then can we actually hold them to the terms of what we agree to here when we decide on it. And if we want to do a resolution on the contract, so be it. But I think the contract is all that matters.
And
Well, and that was why I made the comment about the bills. The one bill that we paid was one of several of the board members, among other things, at the county, along with making insinuation that we were trying to get out of something, and that they were a problem with making a long-term commitment. The fact of the matter is, Oscoda Township has gone out of their way, number one, to draft this agreement, which they asked us to do. We drafted it so that we could contribute and honor our commitment. The other thing is that we've paid our part of this $30,000 grant that the township went after, and so we've paid that. So phase 3, which is in our township, is at our last meeting virtually ready to go. I think they could probably start phase 3 before they could start phase 1, but it's scheduled to be the other way around. There's more work to be done on phase 1, I think, than there is on phase 3 at this point. But Oscoda has gone out of their way, I believe, anyway, to obtain this grant on our own, pay our portion of it for phase 3, and we get treated like that at the county level. I just don't understand their thinking, and that you know, trying to say that we had a commitment, we made an agreement, now we're trying to back out of it. It's absolutely the opposite of what we did. We came up with this agreement so that we could move forward with our commitment, so.
And another funny thing is that one of the commissioners doesn't like tax dollars from his district being expended into this project for the bike path. But for some reason, they feel it's okay for Oscoda to expend our funds outside of our township for something that doesn't exist in our township.
Outside of our borders, yeah.
You know, I have an observation and a question. And the observation is that I think most people on the board, people in the audience know that there are 5 members of the county commission. That would be true of every county in Michigan, 5. 3 of the 5 represent parts of Oscoda Township. You know, downtown here, we've got one gentleman, Mr. Hubel, and a little further out, I think it might be your man Johnson. And then further out, the guy that's from the Hale, Plainfield, catches the western extreme of Oscoda Township. I'm amazed that we're not getting better treatment from 3 out of 5. My question is, when they turned it down, I'm a little fuzzy here, I wasn't there. Do they have a legal reason for turning it down? Like we have a legal problem where our lawyer is telling us you cannot spend money, you know, outside of your own township. Do they also have some legal concern?
Jeff
No.
explained it as, I'm sorry.
At that meeting, no.
No.
No, there was the motion made to accept the agreement. There was no support for it, so it failed, and they moved on to the next subject rather quickly with no thought about any other alternative, even though it was mentioned that if this project failed, their likelihood of getting another DNR grant ever would not happen.
And Jeff explained in the meeting that I had with Fred Lewis after the Develop Alaska meeting, that, what was the point here? That was that they didn't understand the agreement. What was really kind of unreal to me is that they get a pack just like we get a pack. They come to the meeting prepared. How could so many people be unfamiliar with the meaning and the reason and the history behind why this agreement was even formed and why they were being asked to sign it, and then say, we don't understand it? I mean, it was just no attempt in my part to do their due diligence. That's why I feel very annoyed with them right now.
Yep. And they said, a comment was also made, as soon as it was found out that the path route changed to Mill Street, why did Oscoda not right away start seeking a way to get a portion of that path into Oscoda so that we could contribute? And I explained to them, this is your project. You determine where it goes and how it goes. We're not here to make those decisions. We were just asked to whether we were going to financially contribute or not.
Well, I hate to see this go down the drain, but it's heading that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd hate to see it go down the drain as well, John, and completely. I mean, this is something I think would benefit the entire county. It certainly contributes to the entire state of Michigan. But I'll be darned if I'm gonna sit back and let, the commissioners try to make us wrong for something we haven't done. And to Bill's point, we've gone so far in the opposite direction to be accommodating. We're looking for a way to continue to help. I don't understand. I'm not gonna sit back idly and be allowed to have this fake news spread like it's the truth.
So they've got one more meeting to decide before the July 1st deadline.
I plan on being there.
Maybe they're just waiting for a cliffhanger.
Probably.
Like drama.
Are there any other comments?
Well, I would move to endorse the proposed agreement as means for legally contributing to phase 1.
I'll second that. Sorry.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes. I would also like to, motion's passed. I would also like to make a motion that we terminate the previous resolution showing a contribution to Phase 1 as the scope of the project has changed.
Support that.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call.
Mr. Cummings,
Absolutely.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion has passed.
Okay, moving on then.
All right, Engineering Services RFQ.
Yes, some time ago, we talked about the notion of hiring an engineering firm that would serve as our township engineer. Quotes. That concept would have an engineering firm performing many of the services that fall under that realm on behalf of the township on a regular basis, as opposed to bidding on a project-by-project basis. It would be an approach similar to that which we use for other professional services like assessing and auditing, where we would, if we were to move forward, contract for 2 years with the ability to extend for an additional 2 years, totally at the board's discretion. So when that concept was broached, there appeared to be a desire to proceed, and on that basis, an RFQ solicitation has been prepared, and I'm seeking feedback from the board this evening on that solicitation prior to distribution. In short, does the solicitation include the services and content that we think is appropriate to meet our needs?
Comments? For those that weren't there in the Friday work session, I want to point out that this process here is going to help out with some of the internal administrative workload so that we're not constantly bidding every single project. We can save some man-hours in that regard. And there's a few other items that we'd like to have changed in the coming year to help, again, make administration a little more efficient.
You mean, we're not constantly bidding for engineering on every single project?
For
Is that-
this, right,
Yeah.
regarding this one, yes.
And two, it should give us a better handle on the cost, because we wouldn't, in the past, we've had bids for engineering services and then ended up paying more because things were discovered after the fact that required additional engineering.
Correct.
So this should help reduce some of that, I think.
Is this deadline within the time frame that's gonna benefit these bidders?
Yes, I think, your question is it adequate? Does it give them enough time? We believe so. Certainly, we could extend it if there's concern in that regard.
Cause it's past the middle of June already.
Might just put, the dates that are in there are probably, we can modify. Anything that was highlighted in yellow are things that could fluctuate depending on when it actually goes out. So, right, we would extend it accordingly,
I'd give them a little more time.
yeah.
Is this gonna affect any of our current capital improvement projects, like the boat launch or anything like that, or is that already all taken care of?
The contracts for which we have, or projects for which we have contracted engineering services won't be affected, and the boat launch would fit that category.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we distribute the RFP for solicitation.
Support. Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Weed. Roll call.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Next, lagoon maintenance pontoon boat purchase.
Yes, we had previously talked about the need for a specialized watercraft workboat, which is essentially configured like a pontoon boat for maintenance at the new lagoon facility, with that maintenance effort being focused on the new aeration equipment. The proposal was to be funded through surplus SRF loan proceeds. We've now gotten approval to use the money for that purpose. I've attached an email indicating that approval was forthcoming not too long ago. We had originally talked about purchasing the equipment from an out-of-state vendor. However, a citizen provided information indicating that there is a company in Rose City that fabricates these types of watercraft. And we've gotten a cost quotation from American Pleasure Products, which is more cost-effective than the original quote, and it would come from a regional vendor. So along that line of thinking, there is a recommendation attached to my report from our contract operator that a lagoon workboat be purchased from American Pleasure Products at a cost of $10,369. And again, that would be reimbursed through the SRF loan surplus.
Comments?
Bob, is this $10,369 delivered into the lagoon?
That I am not sure of.
Because I don't want to tear that bottom out of it.
Any other comments?
Martin, you're concerned about getting it over the riprap? Is
Yeah, I don't want to tear the liner either. Gonna have to be picked and set, like with a crane, the way I'm seeing it.
How will we get it out in the future, too?
Well, the lagoon don't freeze.
Sure. I've heard reference like it's coming with the trailers and we park it in a garage, but
We don't freeze, it's just somehow figure out how to sandbag it in there for the winter.
Well, my
I'm sure.
understanding is, that, excuse me, there is an attachment to the backhoe that we might be able to purchase that would allow us to lift the equipment in and out of it.
Oh, yeah, plenty heavy. Boy, that's a long reach.
how much would the equipment cost, do you know?
I do not
Ballpark?
know.
Bob, the old cliche, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I don't have the answer, but I gotta believe that there are townships or counties in this state that have a lagoon system that have a pontoon boat on it. Some way to touch base with them and say, hey, guys, what do you guys do?
Sure.
Yeah, so.
Wasn't this, isn't this about $2,500 cheaper than the original
It is.
boat we were looking at?
It is.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the purchase of a wastewater lagoon pontoon from American Pleasure Products, Incorporated, Rose City, in the amount of $10,369 with funds sourced from the remaining SRF loan project.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call.
Mr. Gasky?
Yes, but I'd still like to know if that's delivered in the water, Bob.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Divan fabrication agreement.
Okay, the board has previously approved the purchase of a step van, which would be converted for dive team purposes. The conversion effort was to be undertaken by a local company owned by one of our volunteer firefighters, Jack's Profab, and I note that Mr. Brown is in attendance this evening if there are specific questions relating to this topic. In order to move forward in completing the project, a contract agreement was prepared I note also that the new vehicle has been acquired and is on site in Oscoda. We patterned the contract agreement after our standard format for these types of services, and it also includes specific terms that were developed in discussion with the vendor. This would include a total fee of $17,562 paid in 3 installments, and an understanding that the township would purchase specified pieces of equipment, which are called out in the contract, which total $11,388. Upon review of the contract agreement, a potential issue emerged from the vendor's perspective, and that is the requirement that liability insurance be furnished. There are other types of insurance which we will need to discuss as well, but liability coverage is really the heart of this issue. The vendor has indicated that the cost to meet the requirement would be about $1,300. They would be willing to absorb $300. That would leave the township with an additional $1,000 cost, thereby making our total contribution on the contract sum $18,562. Been determined that workers' comp insurance is not necessary. There are no employees involved, and the automobile liability insurance is much less of a concern. So at this point, consideration could be given to waiving the liability insurance requirement as opposed to absorbing the additional cost. That would represent a substantial departure from our normal practice. On the other hand, we're dealing with a party well known to the township who has a clear interest in a good and positive outcome. We could also consider soliciting competitive bids, but as it stands now, this would be somewhat of a unique project in that we have acquired the vehicle and we would be looking for somebody to furnish equipment and install it. On a local basis, it would probably be likely to garner limited interest. In talking with the vendor further following discussion Friday, it was determined that the policy would be for a year, not 6 months. That's the shortest duration policy. There were some questions board members might recall relative to the pricing. That's in part because we're talking about a 1-year policy versus 6 months. In considering this topic, it would appear important to note that the labor part of the contract is about $5,400. The rest of the contract, absent any payment for insurance, would be equipment. So the variable cost here is relatively limited as compared to the total amount under consideration. We took a look at, and it's difficult to get direct comparisons, at least on a short-term basis here, took a look at vehicles out there in the marketplace that might be somewhat comparable. Our cost here, including purchase of the vehicle and contract amount, would be approximately $82,000. There is a vehicle in Grand Traverse that appears somewhat comparable, but it was fabricated as a dive rescue vehicle. The cost there is $180,000. So I'm not suggesting there might not be cheaper alternatives out there, but Mr. Brown had also provided a couple other examples that were in the same arena. With that, we need to consider how we would like to proceed. Again, I think the options are probably paying the additional $1,000, waiving the requirement for insurance, or considering bidding fabrication and conversion of the vehicle.
Comments?
Well, I always marvel at Jack's abilities, having been on the airport board, and some of the stuff that he's done for airport equipment is amazing. So I'm sure he's capable of doing this.
I'm not in favor of waiving any of the insurance. But I am willing, based on cost estimations from another company, to include extra payment to cover that cost, as long as it covers only township projects and not any other projects.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I don't think it's so much whether the person or the company is a known entity, but just what's responsible in terms of risk for us as a township. If something were to happen, and the word insurance, do we end up becoming liable, or how far does that extend? I don't know. But I think it's, I think if people want to do business with the township, they have to do business as a business.
My inclination the first time around was to bid the project out, but considering the unique nature of the situation, I decided to go ahead as it stands. Given this, I think I'd like to go for a bid, just everything compounded.
This is it's a difficult question because I'm highly in favor of doing business with local businesses whenever we possibly can, and I would even be in favor of changing our guidelines on the amount of money that we use in that regard, and specifically to have people actually doing the work who are going to use the equipment seems to me to be a positive. They're going to make sure that it's what they want and what they need. There was some question in my mind about a business that doesn't have insurance. I don't quite understand how that can come about, but based on the costs that we've been able to get for the new van and the cost of upgrades relative to costs of similar vans, it seems like we've got a pretty good deal here. So Mr. Weed said for another $1,000 and keep it here locally, I think would be a good thing.
I too know Jack's ability with all the things that he do and what he does with all the equipment at the airport and with the fire department. So I don't think we should go out to bid, but I'm also in favor of paying the other $1,000 for the insurance and just going ahead because, like you said, he's invested in the fire department and dive team and everything else. Who better to have him do the work, to be honest.
To anybody, do we have any idea that possibly a bid or another entity doing the same work could be within that range of money he's asking us to pay for the insurance?
We don't, but if you assume that the same exact equipment is gonna be installed, again, you're talking about a variable there, relatively small.
Yep.
So the discussion Friday that I wasn't there because we had field trips as second graders come through the building, but it was 6 months or a year for the insurance, you were saying?
Initially, the discussion was 6 months. My understanding as of today was it was
So then to your point, Tim, then whatever projects it would be just township-based projects for that year covered by that insurance, correct?
No, that would not be the way I
Okay.
understand it. It would be, he would be looking for us to basically throw in more money that he would then use to buy the insurance. And the insurance would then be in his name. And as insurance goes, you can always name insureds on it, which we would probably ask for if this were the case, if we were to do the work. But it would also open him up to be able to do work for other people, in that time period as an insured business. So that's why on the Friday Township work session, I suggested something of a portion of the amount, and for 6 months. But now, if we're looking at a year, I'm kind of like, wow, okay, that's probably getting to be quite a bit of money. I think it was $1,300 for 6 months.
Well, it was $1,300
for the
Or for the year, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, very good. So, anyway, some portion of that I thought would be equitable, but where to draw the line is kind of up to us, and I have an opinion on that.
Mr. Brown, how long does it take, do you figure it takes you to do this?
I got 120 hours plugged into it. 45 hours. It's gonna take more than, that's not hard.
All right, is there a motion?
A question before that, if you don't mind. Have you worked out what the split would be of the 1,300? Or is this where the 1,000 came up?
It would be right. The proposal is 300 for tax pro fab, 1,000 for tax.
Got it. Thank you.
I did have one other question. I know before when we talked about the purchase of the step van, we determined the 17,562. I don't remember us talking about the equipment, other two pieces of equipment that's specified in here for the 11,000. What are those two pieces of equipment?
Two pieces of equipment.
Maybe Jack knows, right?
Jack?
It's grid lockers, there's a lot of grid lockers.
Originally, that was going to be included in the contract.
Oh, okay.
Now we would buy those directly.
Okay.
Yeah, originally, the amount we approved did not exceed $28,950. And if you combine those two figures, it comes out to
Comes out to that.
I think I'd like to say this in terms of the motion, that if we're gonna go forward with this, that we accept this as an additional $1,000 in the cost of the item itself, and not that we're necessarily contributing to the insurance, simply because, I guess I need to be directed by it, where I don't wanna be constantly updating our quotes or our other future agreements with other companies for something that we really thought would have been there to begin with.
Right.
I think to me, the only reason I'm making the exception is because Jack is so involved with the fire department and the
Yeah.
dive team and everything. He's got a vested interest. Otherwise, I would say no.
All right, is there a motion? I make a motion, we go forward with Jack's Profab to include the extra amount for insurance.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, no. Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Footside Park Operations Plan.
Yes, our Parks and Rec directors recently prepared an operations plan for Footside Park based on the request of Consumers Energy. I provided a copy of the proposed plan for your review and potential approval. That's the process we follow with the Old Orchard Park Operations Plan, and submitting input and endorsement prior to transmitting the document to consumers. Friday, one of the comments made was that we need to clarify the fact that the River Queen is operated as a separate lease, and Mr. Apsides had actually made that change. I neglected to bring copies of that with me this evening. So if the board were to approve the plan, it would include the modification as to that clarification.
Comments?
I notice under I believe it's first page, number 3, for the pavilion. No fees for the pavilion facility, however, is advised that if an individual is planning a large gathering, they should contact Township Hall. I don't know that that needs to be included. I don't know that, I mean, as we operate currently, I think just first comes, first serve. If someone were to contact my office, that's what I would tell them. I don't know what good, unless I need to change my operating procedures. I wonder if that should be included.
I think the intent there is that if somebody was going to have some kind of formal event, we might want to know, because of the patronage out there in the summer with the pavilion there, the boat launch, et cetera.
Okay,
I am speculating, because Al and I didn't discuss that.
okay. We would want to know to place a hold on the facility or to warn the prospective user of the circumstances?
And to avoid any user conflicts potentially.
Okay,
Does it need to be in there? No.
okay.
No.
Does that include their ability to reserve?
We do not reserve, as Mr.
Okay.
Nordine indicated.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
Yes, I move that we go ahead with the Footside Park Operations Plan as presented.
Is there support?
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Bulletproof Vest Grant Program.
Yes, I've attached a memorandum from our chief of police indicating that the bulletproof vests the officers wear are due for replacement. There is a program through the Department of Justice available to acquire new vests. That's based upon a 50% cost-sharing relationship or ratio. That's fundamentally the reason this item is in my report, in that the 50% cost amounts to $4,065. Sergeant McNichol had done some research in terms of purchase options and a desired product, and specifically it's being suggested that we purchase 10 Armor Express Razor 2 bulletproof vests at a total cost of $8,130 from CMP distributors, again, towards which the township would pledge $4,065.
Comments?
Question, Bob. Are you familiar with some of the factors that the sergeant leaned on in making a choice? Is it thinness of the product or durability? Or
I am not, frankly. I assume it includes those items and maybe past experience if we've used this product previously.
Okay, I don't know, but I know that they can be very uncomfortable, bulky, and maybe that would be something that they factored in, I don't know, but.
I believe they have come a ways since
Yeah.
many years ago in terms of the bulkiness factor, but they're still warm and can be uncomfortable, that I am certain of.
We have a sergeant here, does he have a comment?
From what we understand, these are supposed to be a pretty comfortable vest, at least as best we're probably gonna be able to get. And then I believe CMP will also be sending someone up to do measurements too. So the vest will be, is individualized.
Do you have any idea how old the present vests are?
Some of them are past due. I think there's some that are dated 2009. And they got about a 5-year life expectancy.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve purchase 10 Armor Express Razor 2 bulletproof vests with related equipment from CMP distributors at a total cost of $8,130, with the understanding township contribution will be $4,065.
Support. Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, informational, the small dump truck purchase.
Yes, our capital improvement plan for our current year includes a 1-ton dump truck purchase at a cost of $27,000. It was originally envisioned that cost would be split between the general fund cemetery activity and the public improvement fund. However, in gathering preliminary information to make the purchase, it's become apparent that the appropriation will not be adequate. Specifically, it looks more like something in the neighborhood with a dump box of $37,000. And it's possible then that the dump box may not have been factored into the original estimate. Regardless of that fact, it's our intent to move forward in soliciting proposal as the vehicle in question needs to be replaced. It's being used more extensively than in the past. The water and sewer departments are taking advantage of it. And we have recently had significant savings result from our backhoe purchase as compared to what was budgeted, you might recall. Largely, it's the same funds that are going to be affected, and essentially, if the board were amenable to proceeding, we would be able to reappropriate some of the backhoe sourced funds towards this purchase. So on that assumption, we intend to proceed unless there are concerns, and that's why I brought this item before the board. But you know, we're probably over budget on this item.
Comments?
A question that you probably can't answer, but I'm going to give it a shot. What portion of the use of this vehicle would be for cemetery purposes?
You're right, I can't answer that.
Okay. Okay.
Well, originally, we had figured half. That's the
Yeah.
way we were gonna appropriate the cost, but now that the water and sewer department is using it significantly, I'm thinking more like at least a third to those two functions and a third to public improvement and a third to cemetery.
Okay. Well, where I was going with that is if it was a half or more than a half, I was, you know, we do share the cemetery with Oscoda Township. Would it be appropriate to contact them for some share of the cost?
Essentially, because it is in the cemetery budget, they would be participating.
They are anyway, right? Yeah, okay.
Any other comments? All right, next, Community Development Coordinator for Toefield Use Agreement.
Okay, thank you. Included in my report was an email from a representative from the local chapter of the Compassionate Friends to utilize Toefield for an event in August called Walk to Remember. The event will be held in the spirit of friendship and as a way of honoring the memories of children, siblings, grandparents, and others that have passed. The date they are requesting is Saturday, August 5th, starting at 10 a.m., and the event would last approximately an hour. In order to accommodate registration, etc., they are requesting the use of the field from 9 a.m. to about 11:30. If approved, this would be the third year this event was held on the field. So this-
Comments?
Sorry.
Is there a motion?
Make a motion that we would approve the request.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Nordine. Roll call.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes. Next, RFP Real Estate Broker Services.
Great. The township recently adopted Resolution 2017-16 establishing the goals and objectives for the years 2017 through 2020. As the board will recall, there were multiple objectives identified as being priorities to initiate and pursue the feasibility of within 1 year of adoption of the resolution. Under Goal 4, the first objective was to identify surplus township property, be it real or personal, assess opportunity for revenue generation, and then market for sale or lease as appropriate. At the May 22nd meeting, Trustee Palmer and Clerk Nordine volunteered to work with staff to develop an RFP to retain services of a real estate agent firm to actively and aggressively market surplus township-owned properties. Included in my report was a draft RFP document for the board's review, as well as a refined list of potential properties for sale that have been reviewed and evaluated. This list could be added to as properties are further identified. Before acting on this agenda item this evening, I wanted to make the board aware of an additional option to consider in terms of an offer from our township attorney. The township's attorney has identified that he has a real estate broker license and would be and has offered to become the broker for the township, and for a flat fee of approximately $1,000 for all properties, would list the properties identified on the multi-list service in lieu of the commission proposed for the listing agent that is identified in the RFP. In evaluating whether to issue the RFP or engage the township's attorney as a real estate broker, I would note a few points for the board to consider this evening. There are obvious economic benefits associated with flat listing fee versus a commission-based listing fee. This approach would also allow for a more direct control of the overall process. Possible disadvantages, however, of not issuing the competitive RFP would include a lack of additional marketing of the properties up and above the RMLS and a loss of institutional knowledge associated with a professional real estate firm, including market analysis to establish a fair market value. In addition, I would note that this approach would also require significantly more direct involvement from a staff standpoint in showing properties, coordinating sales, etc. So this evening, I am seeking direction from the board in regard to the offer recently made forward by the township's attorney to become the broker or to move forward with an RFP for a broker.
Comments?
Is that a conflict of interest? No?
I don't know.
How couldn't it be, I guess? For him?
How could it be?
Well, because what would be the difference of somebody else that would have a real estate license on the board then doing the same thing?
It's not an elected position. Be different if it was a board member.
Good question.
Well, I would just say I appreciate his offer. I think he's always looking out for our best interest, but I think our whole point and our goals and objectives was to try and move these properties and get them back on the tax rolls, and not to, one of the points we had was to increase our commission rate so that we could stimulate some interest with realtors to get these properties off our books. If we only had 1 or 2 or 3, 4 properties, then that might, be a viable option, but I just think we'd lose too much. I mean, there's a reason you hire professionals to do a particular job, and I think in this particular case, there is no real cost to the township to send out for an RFP to hire a realtor until properties are sold. So I would prefer to use the RFP and use a local realtor to make this happen.
Any other comments?
I agree with you.
I agree also.
Is there a motion?
I'd move to issue the RFP for real estate services from a local realtor.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Now, I'm sorry, I have a question, if I may.
Just complete the roll call first.
Okay. Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Go ahead.
Your motion was for a local realtor, so you suggesting we don't send out to out-of-town realtors, or we wouldn't accept
No,
one?
I would suggest we have enough realtors here within our township, our area to.
Okay, I know something listed in the RFP is a desire for commercial abilities and history. I know we discussed that in some meetings. Just a thought, and I guess, what are we considering local? Are we considering
Well, I would say
Township?
Oscoda and Osaba Townships.
Oscoda and Oswald townships?
We have 10 realtors. I mean, if you wanted to, I guess we could extend it to a commercial, a strictly commercial realtor somewhere out of the area, but
Is that what you were considering, John?
I just hadn't considered constricting it to only local.
That might raise a legal question also that we should explore, if the desire to keep it totally local within certain confines.
that would be my preference. It's not like we don't have a number of realtors here in the area.
So if you find out more information, you can bring it back to us at the next meeting, and we can, if need be, we can reconsider another motion.
Certainly.
Okay.
Should also probably clarify, just in fairness to all involved, in terms of the question that Ms. McGuire asked, that I do not believe Mr. Eppard's intent was to generate income from this process. So that would have some bearing on the conflict question.
Right, no commissions.
Right.
I don't know if you.
Right. Well, just. Doesn't.
All right, next under other, draft medical marijuana ordinance, public input and deliberation process. Regarding this, again, I would like to discuss any technical aspects of this ordinance that anybody would like to see adjusted in case this does pass through. And then another part of it is to discuss having a public hearing for this at the next board meeting. And then after that public hearing, whether at that same meeting or the meeting after, to then make a vote on whether we're going to continue further work on this ordinance, or if we are going to decide that we are not going to have an ordinance at all regarding medical marijuana. Does that work for everybody? Is there comments about that?
Sounds like a plan.
I think, just for point of information, most of the work has been done on drafting the ordinance, so there really isn't a lot more unless we change some of the numbers in terms of zoning or number of facilities, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of more work to be done in our plan after it's discussed by the board and a public hearing. The idea was to send our draft to the attorney to actually draft the ordinance, but I think most of the work has been done, so. But I think your plan is a good one to discuss the actual mechanics of what we have. If there's some changes that the board would like to see, we can certainly make those changes, whatever they might be, in the draft that we have in hand. And then have a open hearing on what people think.
I appreciate you clarifying exactly how we're going to proceed up until this point. It was my impression, because of the way events unfolded and the way that discussions took place, that possibly the board had already made a decision one way or the other. So I appreciate you clarifying it and stating that that's not the case and that decision is still ahead of us. Because if it wasn't clear to me at all times, I think the public may have felt that way too, so.
One technical aspect of this I would like to have changed if it does go through is to change the number of allowed facilities in all categories to a maximum of 2. And within that, for the retail, to have a limit of 1 per zone selected. I don't want to have it unlimited or too high of a number at this point, because if it does pass through and we end up in a situation where somebody ends up not being allowed to renew a license, if there happens to be several facilities, I think it'd be very difficult to go through that process of non-renewal. And from what I understand, this is a process where this ordinance will get looked at annually to see if adjustments need to get made. Is that correct?
These things can be adjusted annually in our ordinance. The reason our subcommittee left the licenses for the other ones other than dispensary unlimited is actually we were looking for feedback from the board as to numbers, and we thought if there wasn't a concern by the board on the numbers of the facilities in the other groups other than dispensaries, that we could change that at a later date. I did look up some information. Some of the townships and cities that have already sent applications to the state, their ordinances, Clare, Crockery Township, Lapeer, Niles, Weberville, Pinconning, which is closer to us. And I would note in the Pinconning ordinance, they have listed for numbers that we're talking about is relative to what we're discussing here. They've put in their ordinance, they're allowing 25 growing operations, 25 processing operations, 10 provisioning centers, 2 safety compliance, and 4 transporters.
Agriculture.
That's in Pinconning Township. Or
Now,
Pinconning.
regarding the numbers that I said, I would not like it to be at 1 because I don't want to generate a monopoly. I think competition is very important.
Mhm. So that's an easy change to make in the draft. We can put whatever the board's feeling would be on the numbers for the various licenses. We could put 2 for each facility.
Bill, do you know any more information about, is that mostly in agriculture down there, or is that in the business district also?
I believe the provisioning are in the business district.
That's a lot of agriculture down
Yeah. Yeah, that may be the reason they're allowing more growing operations. Is the agriculture. The state mandates they have to either be in an industrial or an agricultural zoning district.
Any other comments regarding the ordinance?
I just want to thank Bob and Bill for all their hard work and anybody else that's been associated with it. If you definitely have any questions or concerns, you need to talk to them. They have all kinds of information, so, for sure.
I agree with that. They've definitely done a lot of research, not just in Michigan, but in other states too.
Right. I appreciate it.
So glad to make sure that we're gonna have something thorough if it does go through. Any other comments?
I would like to say, in the past, I've said I would not like to see provisioning centers in the B1 or B2 districts. And for a couple of reasons, I'd like to extend that to WB3, which, in my mind, removes provisioning centers from the township. That would be my preferable course of action. I've heard that if we were to exclude B1, B2, that would be too limiting to just only put on WB3, so the obvious step for me then is to just remove it from there. And I've also been made aware of some concerns that if it's not good enough for downtown, in my opinion, people have said, then maybe it shouldn't be put on Wordsmith, and the villages are in the WB3, and again, the logical step for me then is I'd rather just not do it. So.
You're talking just provisioning centers?
Just provisioning centers, yeah, and that's, of course, assuming
Right.
we proceed.
Any other comments? Anything regarding the limitations on the facilities?
I would like to see the limitation,
What kind?
but like you said, just the numbers to bring them down,
Okay. And you would like
should it pass.
no provisioning, zero?
No provisioning, and if we're going, anything more restrictive is good with me as it relates to the ordinance if it comes to that.
Do we have any kind of
Seems all
consensus
right.
regarding provisioning centers?
I would like to at least allow two minimum. We allow two of the other facilities throughout the township.
I make a distinction between the two, between the types of provisioning and the other types. I'm not necessarily pleased with any, but I draw a line between those and the others, so that's where my distinction comes in.
I understand the question, I just think we're backwards. We're now trying to get a consensus, but we're then later in 2 weeks going to figure out whether we want this or not. So I don't understand how to answer the question. So,
If this were to pass through,
What would you
What-
want to have?
what would you be in agreement with?
bluntly,
If
I'm
it
not
were,
in favor of this ordinance.
if it were to pass through.
Worst case scenario.
All right, so
I know you don't
I don't
wanna
know
hear
if we
that, but
entirely have a
but-
consensus on that, but is that enough information for the planning board to do any kind of adjustments prior to
Yeah,
that?
we'll make a change in our draft for the various licenses, and then we'll bring back that for the next meeting to have for our public discussion.
Okay. All right, I make a motion, we set a public hearing at the next township meeting scheduled for 26 June 2017 to discuss the draft medical marijuana ordinance.
I have another question. Can I ask now or after we vote?
Go ahead.
How, are you going to advertise the public hearing so people are well aware of it so that they can attend? And how are we planning to do that?
Yes, we'll advertise it as like a regular public hearing, just like a,
In the paper, on the website?
just like if it was an
everywhere?
enaction of an ordinance.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did you say you're setting the public hearing for the next meeting, or at the next meeting you're gonna set the public hearing?
For the next meeting.
For
So the next meeting, okay.
Is there support?
I'll
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings?
Sure.
Mr. Byer?
Yes.
Ms. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Gieske?
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Board of Review member appointment.
Yes. We have a vacancy on the Board of Review. We have currently an alternate, Ms. Kathy Woosterbarg, who has expressed an interest in serving in the capacity as a regular member. There is a letter in the board packet dated May 22, 2017, setting forth that interest and reasons why she would like to serve in that capacity.
I'll make a motion that we appoint Ms. Woosterbarth to the Board of Review.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Ms. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Gieske?
Yes.
Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Next, PAR Plan Board Election Ballot.
The PAR plan is the insurance program through which the township procures liability and property coverage. It's the Michigan Township Participating Plan, with PAR plan being short for that. They go through an electoral process for board members, and we've been given the opportunity to vote on a representative for our region. We don't need to act, but this is an opportunity if there's a preference for one candidate over the other to take a position.
Any comments?
Is this the first time we've had this opportunity to do this?
I am doubtful. I think in the past, we have not brought it forward. Not certain of that, but we recently had a board member indicate potential interest in running for election, which sort of highlighted interest in general in this activity.
Any other comments?
I know neither candidate.
I was gonna say, I don't know either one,
No
so
idea
why
who
would
they
we even vote, to be honest?
Oh, yeah, we don't need to vote, it's just for information.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, information.
All right, next 4th of July Community Celebration from the Rotary Club and Lions Club.
So this is correspondence from those two clubs indicating the intent to have another community celebration event in conjunction with the 4th of July fireworks show. The community celebration activity has become very popular, attracts a lot of folks to the beach park, and they are planning to do it again, which is good news.
Any comments? I want to thank the Rotary Club and Lions Club for all they do for our community, because they are a significant help.
You're here.
Yep, and if you haven't been down there for that, you gotta go. It's a lot of fun.
Next, Planning Commission recommendation regarding land use permits for barrier-free ramps.
We have a memorandum from our zoning administrator, which is conveying a recommendation to the from the Planning Commission that the fees be waived for land use permits relating to construction of barrier-free ramps. Question has apparently come up, given the cost of the permit in relation to the overall effort and the underlying intent of the construction, whether it is fair, or probably a better word is appropriate, to charge for this type of an endeavor. And the Planning Commission is suggesting that it is not, that we consider waiving that fee.
Comments?
I would just like to mention I'm a member of the Lions Club here in Oscoda, and one of our projects that we do. We raise money in the community so that we can spend money in the community to help people out in various realms. One of them is building these ramps, wheelchair accessible ramps for people that are in need of this. And it seems as though the need has been increasing here as of late. Just an example, one of the last ramps that we built, of course we have 4 to 6 people from the Lions Club that actually build the ramp, and they donate their time. We do pay for the materials. The last ramp that we put in, cost of the ramp, I believe, was $420, but there was an additional $169 that we had to pay in permits and fees. Obviously, the bulk of that was to the county. And so what this is regarding is that the township waived their $20 fee, and our zoning administrator is going to take that and approach the county to see if we can get some relief on the cost of those fees from the county, so that we're not using our funds for paying fees and permits for building these.
I have a question, and I'm sorry, it's kind of maybe a dumb question, but when we were to say here barrier-free, are we talking something that does not have a railing of some sort? Or what are we saying when we specify specific barrier-free ramps?
I think when they're talking barrier-free, it means for wheelchair access. So there's no barrier for a wheelchair to.
Oh, got it. Thank you. All right.
This is for construction for the community as a whole, correct? Ramp construction, not simply Lions Club.
Any other comments?
Any lessening of planning and zoning fees is okay in my book, so all right with this.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that, I don't know, do we have to make some type of a policy or something to waive the fees for barrier fee ramps? Or an adjustment to our fee schedule? Okay.
So you're making a motion that we
Adjust our fee schedule to waive the
zero?
fee for the barrier-free ramps.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call?
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, we are into our second public comment. There is no need for a card, but there is still a 4-minute time limit. When you come up to the podium, please introduce yourself. Does anybody wish to speak?
Thank you. My name is Mike Munson. I'm a homeowner here in the Township of Oscoda, and I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to maybe get some clarity on this medical marijuana issue and the ordinance. I'm looking for board input here. Basically, medical marijuana is, in the state of Michigan, is here to stay, correct?
It's
And
all-
there's probably little this board or the public can do to change that. Is that correct? We're getting nods, yes. For a user to use medical marijuana, they need to have a prescription or a card so that it's a controlled population. Is that correct?
Yes.
The ordinance that is being considered by the township is the ability to license dispensaries, storage areas for medical marijuana, as well as growing units for medical marijuana. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. If recreational marijuana becomes law, would these distribution centers be first on the list to be sales points?
We have no idea. It depends on what the state decides at that time.
Okay, but it would lead one to believe, and I basically say this as a slippery slope, the format's there to have dispensary centers. So they would probably be, common sense, they would be the first ones to be picked to be where you could buy it retail. Is that a good assumption?
Yes.
I'm not gonna assume what the state's gonna do.
It is, okay, so I'm just saying to the public, to the board, consider this slippery slope. If we establish medical marijuana dispensary centers in here, it's a potential to draw in, if and when recreational marijuana becomes law, that population. Is that what we want? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak?
Hi, Kathy Woosterbarth. Thanks for the appointment for the Board of Review. Hopefully I can be helpful with that. I just wanted to make a small point on the ramps. I thought I had remembered from the Planning Commission meeting that was applying only to residential zones. Am I remembering that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, and John had asked about the entire community, so I wanted to make sure that was clarified. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak?
Paul Rurkowski, Oscoda Township. Want to finish up what I was talking about earlier about Super Weed attending the PFC conference. I feel that since the township has already ascertained a environmental consultant to do their scientific consultation, there's no need for a politician to go to this conference and for us to spend $3,000 of our tax money. Furthermore, I've done the math. Turns out that the government rate costs to attend this conference are about half of what Super Weed has put in this motion to attend this conference. So I would ask the board if they would publicly acknowledge whether or not they reviewed the cost estimate by Mr. Weed, and if they have approved of that cost estimate, or did they just take his word on it? I think you owe the public whether or not you actually reviewed that before you approved the motion. Let's see. From where I come from, if you put in for going for travel for government, and you put in for more than the actual cost, that's considered government fraud. Okay, now to the MMJ facilities. I'm strongly opposed to it. And, you know, it sounds like the township is all in favor of it because it's gonna bring money into your budgets. And I'm opposed to that. I don't know if the public knows this, but 90% of MMJ holders, card holders, have cards because for pain, not for any debilitating diseases, but because they claim they have pain so they can smoke dope. So that's the experience across the country where medical marijuana cards are issued. It's basically a ruse to allow recreational dope smokers to smoke their dope. And they're able to get it from these places that manufacture and distribute it allegedly for medical purposes. I would say that our some of the board members have made statements in the past that they are neither opposed nor in favor of the dope smoking, but only that they just wanted to look at it for a business. And I'd say that what we should have our board do is they should be required to sign a statement to affirm whether or not they smoke dope themselves. And that would determine whether or not they have a bias before they vote on this law. So they should be able to say whether they have a medical marijuana card or if they smoke dope recreationally, yes or no. And if they say yes, then they should recuse themselves from voting on this ordinance. Let's see here. You know, we're gonna take notice. I belong to a group, a citizens group called Abnormal that is strongly opposed. We're gonna take notice on how you vote on this law. And our group, Abnormal, stands for Against Brain Numbed Officials Ramming in Marijuana Laws. So we're gonna take notice on how you vote, just keep that in mind. When you do your RFQ for the engineering firm, I suggest you don't just limit it to your buddies and relatives, like you may have done in the past, just go to your relatives. As far as advertising for the, public hearing for the, medical marijuana, I strongly suggest that it's real prominent and that the Oscoda, paper put it on the front page to make sure we get maximum participation from the public. And that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? All right, then we're on to board comment. Anybody have any comments?
Me?
Yes.
I just want to remind people that we have the drop-off refuse program this next Saturday, the 17th, at Sunrise Disposal off of Sunset. Go over the bridge, turn left by the hilltop, and just follow around there. It's from 8 to 2 p.m. You can come to the treasurer's office. It's $10 to get your permit. You just need your permit and your driver's license. You need to be a resident or a property owner in Oscoda Township to obtain it. Have a little sheet here that you can fill out. It's got all the do's and don'ts and things associated with it. Or you can call our office at 739-7471 and ask us some questions and we can give you the answers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board comments?
I'm glad you brought that up, Jamie. I think we should get with our sister township, Oscoda, against the cemetery butts Sunrise Sanitation. If you ever drive into the cemetery and make a left-hand turn, they should be made to put a fence up there. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, cemetery is one thing, but when you have to look at that, besides being at the cemetery for personal reasons, why, it looks pretty trashy. We can get with our sister township and see if we can enforce something there.
And Jamie, I remember from maybe a couple meetings, maybe I didn't hear the answer, but are they accepting like TVs or electronics on this?
TVs and electronics, yes. And I've sold 25 permits so far, and they're coming in like crazy this week.
Good.
Any other board comments?
Just a couple things from the Planning Commission. We revised our Planning Commission bylaws. We've made those changes. We began a discussion regarding the omitting the wordsmith, the W designation from the zoning district, the former wordsmith days. And the master plan, Spicer is in the process of rewriting the original plan that they sent to us. That's it.
Any other comments?
Yes. Just a note for the board that Senator Debbie Stabenow did come through here in late May, toward the end of the month, just kind of on the lowdown, wanted to find out about our water situation and trying to make herself better informed of what's going on, you know. And she had some good suggestions. No big promises or anything like that, but some good feedback to us after listening to the situation. The second thing I would say is we do have some members of our board that have not lived in this community 10, 20, 30 years or all their lives. But I think they make a genuine contribution to this board, and I think to show that the public agrees with that is that 2 of them were appointed to fill vacancies before the recent election. And the public got to see what contributions they had to make, and they did very well in the election in November, and we're elected. They're not appointed people anymore, and I welcome them.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'd like to point out, just in case there's some misunderstanding, but I believe the general public is intelligent enough to already have deciphered this, to understand it, that when one of us travels, that we're not getting paid up front. that we collect the receipts, and when we come back, we present those receipts. Those are reviewed by at least 2 of the elected officials to determine whether those receipts are valid or not, and then an appropriate reimbursement is made. So just because an estimation was made does not mean that is what's going to get paid. So some circumstances could arise or not arise. One thing I am not going to do is to try to undervalue something in an estimation and have it become a surprise, like we've had so many times happen before, especially with engineers, where they say it's only going to cost this much, and then by the end of the project it costs this much. I would much rather say it's going to cost this much, and then later say, hey, some things worked out for the better, or it's able to be this much.
We're under budget.
I'd like to comment and say that travel is not a capitalizable expense. We're not borrowing money and therefore incurring additional costs through interest or leveraging our credit in order to cover your travel.
I'd also like to point out that out of every travel I have done for the township, and I know Jamie can attest to some of those, Chris Carrasco could attest to the others, that I have never sought full reimbursement for any travel. There's only been one time I've sought reimbursement for mileage. There's at least one time, probably 2 times, I never sought reimbursement for hotel expenses. I've never sought reimbursement for food. So I have a lot of out-of-pocket expenses for the things that I've done for the township. And I do that because I want to do that, not because I want any accolades. That's just how it's been. I've kept it quiet up until all of a sudden it's become an issue. The other thing I want to touch on is the water filtration system. What's the steps that are the municipal water system that the water travels through before it leaves the facility?
There's an intake out in Lake Huron, and there are activated filtration systems in the building that a media that the water runs through to filter it once it is within the confines of the building. It's also some kind of chemical treatment, I believe, but it is filtered before it goes into the municipal water system.
So inside these big current concrete vats that they have in there, what's in those?
I believe there is sand, and the question at hand appears to be whether there's any element of carbon filtration. I believe that there is. We can certainly investigate that further, but that appears to be the question, and I believe that the answer is yes, but I would want to confirm that.
All right, thank you.
I have one comment also, that in terms of, and this is somewhat situationally specific, but in general, when we get FOIA requests for legal bills, they are redacted so that specific subject matter cannot be known by the party requesting. There is some general information provided as to dates, where it's charged. So if one were to try and calculate the bill relating from a specific subject, there are assumptions that would have to be made.
Thank you very much.
I have one to add now.
Yes.
In regard to your travel expense, I would just like to say that I did look at the numbers before we voted on it, and I had a conversation with you at a certain point about it being, your amount being higher, and you explained what you explained tonight, and that was good enough for me. So I just want everyone to know that it was looked at. There were other eyes on it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other board comment?
I would just like to say that I think it's a value for all of us to attend conferences from time to time to gain additional information. I'm new on the board. I recently attended the MTA conference in Lansing, where we went to seminars all day long and touched a number of topics. There is a wealth of information to be gained, and I think it's valuable for every member of this board to participate in that, within reason, of course, to gain more knowledge, to make let us do our jobs better and be more informed on topics as they come to the board. So I'm fully in support of Mr. Weed gaining this information and giving a talk at this seminar. I think that's important for Oscoda Township, and I think it's important for all of us on this board to attend various conferences to gain information that will help us hopefully run the township in a positive direction. So, that's all.
Conferences are generally thought to be boondoggles. I mean, I think too many people see them as the Las Vegas junket. And in this particular case, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Reed, but is this conference not actually 10 hours every day?
The first day is actually going to be 12 hours. Second day will be 10.
And you intend to attend all of that?
Yes, every bit of it.
And I think the record should show that this was not your motion. I made the motion that we approve this trip, and Mr. Palmer supported it. You did not make the motion. So,
Any other comments? All right, then I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.